You're watching This Week in Louisiana Politics with Fred Childers.
Good Sunday morning to you. I'm Fred Childers. Thanks for joining us for This Week in Louisiana Politics on your local election headquarters. Well, the agency that runs Medicaid in Louisiana is changing which insurance companies it works with for coverage. Harrison Golden explains why new state contracts could leave enrollees looking for a new provider this fall.
People who were like me were scared.
Brianna Rowe insists she wouldn't have survived stage 4 ovarian cancer without chemotherapy funded by her insurance. She says it's what's inspired her work at Louisiana Healthcare Connections. The insurer is one of 5 that get monthly fees from the state to cover Medicaid recipients.
We're fighting, and I just want them to continue to fight.
But she says that fight has hit a roadblock. Louisiana's Department of Health last week announced plans to award new Medicaid contracts to 4 organizations, not included LHCC and Aetna. The proposed New Year's Day roster change would leave more than 500,000 Medicaid recipients having to get new health plans when open enrollment starts in October.
For them to have that unsteady feeling of where will my insurance be in a few months, it's devastating to me.
Who is their doctor? Who do they go see?
The state's move is prompting concerns at the state capitol and on Capitol Hill. Congressman Cedric Richmond penned a letter to Governor John Bel Edwards last week, suggesting his administration reopen ties to LHCC.
There's not going to be an issue with people have no doctors.
A governor's office spokeswoman is defending the state's move, saying a, quote, vast majority of doctors in Louisiana accept multiple health plans. A statement goes on to call LDH's move a cost-saving measure for patients.
Don't be afraid.
But still Rowe questions whether the new contractors would be able to duplicate LHCC's medical network.
It's one of those things where you have to fight the good fight, and me as well as all the employees at Louisiana Healthcare Connections are going to fight until we can't.
The insurer plans to file a formal protest with the state to keep their Medicaid services intact. Harrison Golden, NBC Local 33 News.
And LDH officials say they're still negotiating the terms of the state's new Medicaid care contracts. Well, a new law will lend a hand to those struggling rural hospitals, which are closing at an alarming rate across the country. The U.S. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services approved a plan to change the way federal money is distributed, which critics say has long favored hospitals in urban areas. The amount of money given to each hospital is currently based on how much their employees are paid. The new rule will change the formula and give rural hospitals billions more dollars each year.
It is based on wages, and so wages in urban areas tend to be higher, and so then every year the higher wage hospitals were getting more and more, and it was just creating a larger and larger disparity.
There are 27 so-called critical access hospitals in Louisiana and 158 rural health clinics. Well, as we count down to Election Day in Louisiana, the final major candidate for governor threw his hat into the TV ad ring. Harrison Golden explains how Congressman Ralph Abraham's ad differs from his 2 opponents.
Ralph Abraham.
Congressman Ralph Abraham is the last of the 3 major contenders to put a commercial on the air.
That's what Louisiana can do.
And his ad differs from what his 2 main rivals have released lately.
I'm Eddie Risponi.
One of the greatest influences in my life.
Both Governor John Bel Edwards and Republican challenger Eddie Risponi have spoken directly on camera in their recent ads,
gubernatorial,
while the congressman leaves his case to narrators.
Once considered a long shot.
A push to build a rock star's mystique, says political analyst John Cuvion.
These first ads are basically kind of a setting the initial impression of the candidates.
The release follows weeks of speculation over when the congressman's ads would hit the airwaves and whether the Abraham team had enough money to compete. Both Edwards and Risponi have been spending millions on ads since their blitzes began last month.
So from Risponi's ads, we know, of course, that he is allied with Trump and he drives a pickup truck.
Put a bumper sticker on my truck.
Governor Edwards, of course, is talking about teacher pay raises and his surpluses.
Is a good education.
In Abraham's case, to me, what he's trying to go for is creating a buzz about his candidacy.
Abraham had $1.3 million in his bank as of the most recent reporting period. His aides maintain their advertising schedules and spending are going just as planned ahead of the October 12th primary. Campaign consultant Lionel Rainey telling us, quote, "There have been no indicators that would have had us starting earlier than we did." He adds that Abraham, like Edwards and Risponi, plans to keep ads on TV through the end of the race. Harrison Golden, your local election headquarters.
Okay, not surprisingly, those three candidates are not the only ones splashing some cash in the advertisement game. Several political action committees, otherwise known as PACs, have also been hard at work putting out ads supporting or even attacking certain candidates. Harrison Golden continues with a look at that spending.
At this point in Louisiana's governor's race, chances are you've seen the advertisements from the candidates themselves.
I'm Eddie Risponi.
Ralph Abraham.
John Bell.
But new ads this week highlight the growing clout that outside groups hold. The most recent ads are from Gumbo PAC,
paid for and authorized by Gumbo PAC,
a political action committee spending many of its nearly $3 million on messages against the main two Republicans in the fight.
Phony Eddie Risponi. He's not for you.
Looking out for himself, not you.
Other committees, like the Republican Governors Association's Right Direction PAC, have put their millions toward ads against the incumbent Democrat.
Higher taxes, lost jobs. That's John Bell Edwards, paid for by RGA Right Direction PAC.
Back in 2010, the Supreme Court upheld the legality of so-called super PACs, which can raise unlimited amounts of money. Some of the donors are well known, and others are allowed to stay anonymous.
And their claims, can you substantiate them? Does anyone call them out? No, they pretty much get away with what they want.
Pollster Bernie Pincinat says these groups often feel more free to do the mudslinging, while the candidates get to keep their hands clean. He sees the trend bringing more hard-hitting ads this year in a state currently home to the Deep South's lone Democratic governor.
It's the focus nationally. You'll see a lot more money coming in. You'll see a lot of PACs coming in. So Louisiana, by October 12th, we will be the focus of a very important election.
And if no gubernatorial hopefuls win more than half of the October 12th vote, that super PAC influence could well extend to November 16th, when the top two vote-getters would hold a runoff. Harrison Golden, your local election headquarters.
Well, the company who had a multi-million-dollar flood recovery contract taken away because of a potential conflict of interest will have the chance to compete again for that work. Governor John Bell Edwards' administration ordered a redo of the bid process, but did rule that Hunt, Gullett and Associates can be considered for the federally funded contract. That group was selected for the contract originally back in March, but it was rescinded 2 months later because of what the administration called a potential unfair advantage. Coming up next, we're talking to State Senator Sharon Hewitt. That's next on your local election headquarters. Stay with us.
This is your local election headquarters.
Well, I'm joined here on set by Senator Sharon Hewitt. She's a Republican from Slidell. Thanks for coming on the show, Senator.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Well, as we were talking before, I've watched you pass a lot of legislation. I was down at the Capitol with you during the 2018 sessions. I think there were like 4 of them. There was a lot passed then, but this last session, I think you got like a dozen bills passed through the legislature. So I want to talk about some of them. The first one I want to talk about with you is a bill that actually became newsworthy to us when the Secretary of State, Tom Shedler, went through his sexual harassment suit. Your bill, I believe it was 182. What did that bill do in that situation?
Well, you know, last year I worked to pass sexual harassment legislation that established better policies within the state. Mm-hmm. We knew that we did not have good policies in place. And then I had the legislative auditor actually help us scope out how big is this sexual harassment problem in the state of Louisiana. And he came back and he said that we had spent $10.4 million over the last 10 years of taxpayer dollars on sexual harassment settlements and judgments. And so this year my focus was on protecting taxpayer dollars so that we weren't spending that money on the indiscretions of bad actors within state government, both elected officials and state workers. So the bill was focused on not using taxpayer dollars for those indiscretions. Mm-hmm. And of course it was very well received by my constituents. They're outraged that we're spending their money on those those things when the needs of our state are so great.
Well, not only your constituents, you got some bipartisan support on this too, right?
Oh, I think it passed with flying colors on both sides, so it was definitely not a partisan issue. You know, we want to have a safe workplace for all people, and we want to make sure that those that are guilty of sexual harassment are accountable for their own actions and hold elected officials in particular to a higher standard.
Did it apply to the Tom Shedler situation?
Had this legislation been in place previously, it would have. And so, you know, now we're in a little bit of a transition period. But clearly, the intent of the state of Louisiana is that, you know, that the money for those settlements and judgments should be borne by the guilty parties.
Are we seeing, just switching gears a little bit here, you've been down there at the Capitol for a few years now. Are we seeing more women in the legislature these days?
Well, we hope so. You know,
they're running, more are running for sure.
There are more women running, and I think it's great. You know, we have, Louisiana, I think we have about 16% of the legislature is represented by women. You know, of course, our voting population is, I think we have 53% of the registered voters are female. So we're a long way from actually having a representative style of government that represents the demographics of our people. So I've been very active around the state in helping to recruit qualified women. It's not about just being a female. It's about having qualified women. We have business owners, we have engineers, we have lots of very qualified women who are running for office, and they bring a different perspective. You know, we're all a product of our life experiences and how we look at solving problems. I'm an engineer by background, so I look at things from a very you know, engineering perspective, logical in terms of how I approach problems. And so we need different perspectives. So I'm excited that we're going to have, I think, some more women in the legislature this fall.
Right. I know you've done a little bit of battling with the governor over the budget, especially during the 2018 sessions. He had a tougher time, I think, in 2018. This last session was relatively easy compared to the budget issues that you guys dealt with in 2018. How do you think he's handled the budget so far? You know, he's on the campaign trail now to run for re-election. How do you think he's handled the budget so far?
Well, it's really kind of almost humorous to me. You know, last year he was talking about the fact that he believed he had cut the budget by $600 million over several years. And of course, I knew that wasn't true, and that was proven to actually not be true. The budget has increased every year. To me, a tax cut is only when you're spending less today than you were last year or the year before, and so that's factually not true. Last year, he got a big bump or a big help from the federal tax cuts that President Trump put in place. That gave the state of Louisiana basically an extra $500 million because in Louisiana, when Louisiana residents' federal taxes went down, their state taxes actually went up because of the way the deductions work. And so Louisiana, we never talked about that. The taxpayers in Louisiana were getting hit with an extra $500 million in income tax to the state of Louisiana, and then on top of that, the governor pushed through an extra 0.45 cent sales tax, which was another $300 million, and then this year we had a surplus.
Yeah, and I think in his campaign commercial, the first one he's released, he compares his budget to former Governor Jindal's budget, and he says his budget is stabilized compared to Jindal's budget.
Well, a stabilized budget for one person is a tax increase to somebody else. It is stabilized because we are all paying more taxes now in the state of Louisiana than we ever have before. And there was a bill in the session this year that I would have supported had it gotten to the Senate side, where we would have given some of that money back to the taxpayers, that $300 million. Yeah. And I think the taxpayers are tired of giving, and never knowing where their money's being spent, or not feeling like it's being spent in the right places. You know, one of the things that I worked on for the last 2 years, Fred, had to do with dedicated funds. I think we've talked about that before. Half of the state's budget is tied up in 400 different dedicated funds, where those entities get their money right off the top, no questions asked. Crazy things like the boll weevil fund. Well, we eradicated the boll weevils years ago. But yet they still get a dedicated funding stream, and what that does is it prevents us from really having all the money on the table so that as legislators we can prioritize our funding, which is what I believe taxpayers want us to do.
Right.
And so the work of my committee is to help eliminate those dedicated funds. We've unraveled about $120 million so far, and I hope that we'll do more. We're continuing to work. This will be our 3rd year to work on that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of taxpayers really have a problem with knowing that some of those funds are dedicated. Meanwhile, when we need cuts, we go straight to higher education and health.
Yes, that's right, because our hands are tied. So we need to untie our hands. We need to make everybody compete for funding, to justify their need for funding, explain to us what they did with the money that we've already given them, and allow us to prioritize the state's budget just like families do every year and businesses do every year.
Yeah. All right, we're running out of time, but real quick, tell me about tort reform.
Tort and insurance reform is one of the single biggest issues in our state right now. We have the 2nd highest car insurance rates, which every Louisiana citizen knows and experiences. Sure. We have trucking companies that are having difficulty getting insurance because the big insurance companies don't want to write insurance for them. Our society, our laws in Louisiana provide for a very litigious environment, and it is running businesses out of our state. If we don't make a major course correction with that, we're going to be in a world of hurt. I've had a couple of bills to attempt to do that. The seatbelt gag bill that would allow, right now in Louisiana, you cannot tell a jury if someone is in an accident and was not wearing their seatbelt.
Really?
That's ridiculous. That results in higher jury awards than should have happened, and certainly more serious injuries. And so my bill would have simply eliminated that, which is a common sense thing.
What happened with it?
The trial lawyers killed it.
Yeah. Well, interesting. Certainly interesting. We'll keep following your bills in the next legislative session as well. State Senator Sharon Hewitt, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
This is your local election headquarters.
Welcome back. A major upgrade to the New Orleans Superdome cleared its last major hurdle on Thursday. The state will sell up to $350 million in bonds to fund upgrades to the stadium. As part of the deal between the state and the New Orleans Saints, the stadium would get a nearly $500 million, with a B, dollar facelift, while the Saints would agree to stay in New Orleans for an additional 15 years. The upgrades would be phased in over a 4-year period starting next spring. And the goal, of course, is to have construction finished in time for the 2024 Super Bowl. Well, the Louisiana Supreme Court called a timeout on the lawsuit against the NFL for the infamous no call against the Saints. Now, the court ruled that the NFL does not have to hand over documents or answer questions just yet about the failure to call that penalty there that may have cost the Saints a Super Bowl trip. Now, the suit was filed by a Saints fan who claims that the NFL committed fraud by not calling the game fairly. Now that the lawsuit is on hold, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell will not have to give a deposition until at least October. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
This is your local election headquarters.
Welcome back. looking ahead to the week, the Associate Executive Director of the Pennington Biomedical Research Center will be at the Baton Rouge Press Club tomorrow to discuss the center's new contracts with the Defense Department. Those contracts are part of a new partnership that aims to help U.S. soldiers maintain muscle mass and mental sharpness under combat. Well, thank you for joining us for This Week in Louisiana Politics. I'm Fred Childers. I'll see you next Sunday right here on your local election headquarters.